Hello, School Transportation Nation. I'm Tony Corbin, the publisher of School Transportation News. Today on the podcast, we've got some exciting content. I got my host, Ryan Gray. But before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. And our tech tip is brought to you by Zonar.
Welcome back to the nation, folks. I'm Ryan Gray, as Tony mentioned, editor-in-chief of School Transportation News. Our guest a little bit later today will be Charlie Hood, the retiring NASDPTS executive director.
Excellent, Ryan. We're looking forward to that interview. And first, before we kick it off, I want to remind everybody we have our Green Bus Summit coming up April 20th through the 22nd. Put that on the radar. It's free to register. We opened up registration. So we've got lots of great content. Be sure and go to greenbussummit.com for all the details. And Ryan, to kind of jump into the latest news, what do we have going on with COVID relief right now?
Well, the Senate, it's like watching paint dry. In fact, I have up on my computer screen here a live feed of the Senate chambers. And literally, there's a bunch of empty chairs. There's a bunch of people talking, sitting down on the steps, looking at some papers. Really, what we're seeing is, it's kind of turned into a little bit of a morass, kind of slugging our way through the swamp here. There was some work done over last week. Among that, 15 hours I read of reading the entire 600 plus page legislation. So what we do know is it looks again like the minimum wage is off the docket. Really, the wrangling right now, it seems to be about unemployment payments. We did see last week also that they seem to come up with a deal on that $1,400 stimulus direct payments to people, basically capping it at $150,000 for couples, $80,000 for individuals. So if you make over that, you're not getting anything. But, they're continuing to go through a lot of seemingly pork that's in the 600 pages. I know that one of the key Democrats, Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, kind of left the fold there and was going to vote with the Republicans there. So the Democrats were working on that as of Friday. So that's a little bit a look under the hood there. Again, it's like watching paint dry, Tony. It's not fun. Hopefully they start moving the needle quickly.
Yeah, well, some other positive headlines I saw last week is J&J has their one-shot vaccine out. I'm sure everybody's excited that. I think the efficacy might be a hair lower than the Moderna and the Pfizer where you're getting the 2 shots, but still it kind of makes the process easier, put somebody else into the mix, gets more vaccines out in the system. I know for my daughter's school, they're offering vaccines to teachers and people in the school right now. So they're doing that in a local facility. And so that seems to be an ongoing process. More educators, transportation professionals I talk to are getting vaccinated. So that's a really good sign. That's going to help us get back to school sooner. So lots going on there, Ryan. I mean, what else is going on in the world of mask mandates? Any other exciting news there?
Well, everyone was shocked last week when Texas, the governor there, Governor Abbott, is really gearing up towards reopening the economy in full. So it was talking about ending the mask mandate there. Really that kind of talk, and we're seeing more of this, frankly. Mississippi, Wyoming's relaxing some of the restrictions. So there's like Williamson County in Tennessee. But what these rescinding of mask mandates anyways, they seem to not have any effect on schools. So actually got some confirmation from a spokesperson at the Texas Education Agency last week and said that schools retain authority over their own operations in Texas. And that's pretty much across the board, right? The local control of school districts so they can still mandate those masks. So really, we're not seeing a lot of effect, at least yet, on reducing or rescinding these mask mandates. Schools, it continues to be business as usual as they've come to know it this past school year.
Yeah, I know Taylor Hannon wrote an article on the STN website, was like, no shirt, no shoes, no masks, no service, right? So it was one of those stories that kind of you just think about when you go to your local restaurant or establishment. And but yeah, I mean, it really kind of was a shocking, comment. And I know I saw educators and transportation professionals on social media sound off a bit about this. I know Kane Smith, the transportation director down at Cypress Fairbanks in Houston, he was commenting, what are we going to do now? So I think definitely it caught people kind of on their heels and really was like, wow, what does this mean for school transportation? Because we've been telling people one thing and then they go completely the other way and do something else. But I think we posted another story, Ryan, too, about people getting on school buses. They still need to be wearing those masks, right? I mean, isn't that the general consensus out there with transportation professionals?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, unless it's a student with disabilities that has some kind of medical condition that's not appropriate. But yeah, across the board, like I said, most people continue to require masks. Now, not everyone, as Taylor found out, there are some places that have never really required masks. They make it optional. It's not that they're forbidding mask wearing, but they're not placing that emphasis on them. And again, you have to look at where some of these districts are, if they're in more rural areas, and you got to look at the rate of COVID in their areas. Certainly something like that's not going to fly in Los Angeles or New York or Washington, D.C. or Seattle or Chicago, Illinois, you take your pick. But definitely we have seen some of that relaxing of regulations. And again, a lot of what we're seeing right now from some of these state governors, they're really looking at businesses and trying to reopen those and looking at mask mandates from that standpoint. But in terms of both what we've seen in Texas and Mississippi, it's still, even companies or businesses, restaurants, they can still require masks. So back to that headline, we have local control in schools. Businesses can require their patrons to mask up. So if anything, it's kind of, I've taken it kind of as more of ceremonial hand wringing that's going on. That's kind of like, well, we're going to go ahead and try to reopen the economy. And it's definitely the intended effect, I guess, has been, more news headlines. But, for schools, they can still basically make the call.
Excellent, Ryan. Well, let me shift gears and head over to our tech tip this week, brought to you by Zonar, a leader in smart fleet management. Fixing vehicle problems is pricey. Add unexpected costs like towing, and your costs go up. Keep vehicles running smoothly by shifting to a more proactive approach to maintenance. Enhance preventative measures with modern fleet technologies, and extend those efforts with predictive solutions to prevent future issues and breakdowns. Your fleet, shop, and budget will thank you. Learn more at zonarsystems.com/rethink. That's zonarsystems.com/rethink. So, Ryan, we're still hearing a ton about EV, electrification, a lot of funds out there for school buses, and we've got some new legislation that popped up. What's going on with that?
Senator Patty Murray from Washington State is introducing the latest federal effort to really spur electric school bus adoption, basically going after those Biden campaign promises of getting all 500,000 school buses to be electric. First, it was by 2025. Now the administration says by 2030. Still very ambitious and likely unrealistic. Yet it shows that the feds are definitely trying to put their money where their mouth is anyways. So really what this Clean School Bus Act, or this latest iteration of it, would provide the U.S. Department of Energy with about $1 billion over 5 years to, quote, spur increased adoption of this clean technology, unquote. We remember a couple years ago, actually summer of 2019, now Vice President Kamala Harris, she introduced a similar bill, again, looking for $1 billion for electric school buses. This legislation, if it moves forward, it would also include up to $2 million in grants. So basically trying to get a shot in the arm to the DERA funds, those Diesel Emission Reduction Act funds that EPA is doling out every year to try to flip over those older diesel buses, get them off the road, scrap those, and get EVs into the system. We also have heard that there are a couple companion bills being worked on in the House right now. What we're looking at for Green Bus Summit actually is to get an update on that. So next month, we should know a lot more. We're going to open things up on Tuesday, April 20th with a talk from Suzanne Sullivan. She's a lobbyist and consultant in DC. She's got a great history in the federal government working for Norman Mineta in the Senate, as well as working at the Department of Transportation. So she's going to, hopefully by late April, we'll have a little bit more information to share with us on how things are going, both with legislation on specifically green school buses, but also with infrastructure, because the two topics are very much aligned.
Excellent. Yeah. And we're also going to hear from a couple of other interesting speakers. We have Tucker Perkins, who's the president and CEO of the Propane Education Research Council. He's going to be talking to us about the latest and greatest about propane vehicles, where that's headed, how he sees the school bus market shaping up, how propane marketers play a big part in school transportation. Obviously, propane energy is the largest alternative energy offering in school transportation. So we'll enjoy the talk from Tucker, as well as Bluebird will be bringing forward a representative. They are both diamond sponsors at the Green Bus Summit. So we're looking forward to having them participate with us. And it'll be very interesting. We have all the major OEMs, Thomas, IC, Bluebird, Lion, Green Power, Collins. There's just so many different providers that are engaged with us. And we're really excited to hear from all the representatives about the new technology that everybody's building out, where they're headed, all the partnerships that we're seeing with infrastructure partners like Thomas. They work with Proterra as one example. Bluebird's obviously working with Cummins. So there's some really great opportunities to learn a lot at Green Bus Summit from all the major OEMs about everything kind of on the horizon, as well as funding and grants. There's just a lot of really good meat on the bone. Ryan is putting together just a stellar educational agenda for us. And, Ryan, you want to tantalize us with any other kind of sessions that you would be thinking top of mind for Green Bus Summit that people would love to attend?
Certainly, we talked about alt energy funding sources. Going to have a talk on that. Of course, what the experience districts are having with electric, with propane, also with diesel, renewable diesel that's being used. Renewable propane is coming. We are looking at finding equity for how we deploy these electric school buses. That's a big element of all of these programs. It's talking about putting these electric buses in low-income areas throughout the district. So looking to have a talk on that. Talking about, making V2G a reality, engaging utilities to come in, because there's a lot of promise with V2G, but it's not there yet. There needs to be a lot of work still to be done on those kind of things. Looking at technical support for fleet operators, looking to implement EVs, looking for what happens when the batteries. We don't know what's the life on some of these batteries. Are there recycling programs? We know that on the commercial side, in terms of homes and those kind of things, we all know going over to Home Depot or Lowe's or the different places you can drop your batteries in. Well, what about for vehicles? What about for school buses? Interestingly enough, Tim Shannon, who's at Twin Rivers Unified in Sacramento, he has just about the most experience operating the latest generation, I should say, of electric school buses. And his buses are over 5 years old, and he still has 98% life in those batteries. So a lot of it has to do with, duty cycle and how you're using these vehicles. We're going to be talking maintenance. So lots of great stuff on tap.
Yeah, and technology, I think, is a really big part of that, Ryan. How do you manage all this energy, all this fuel management? What's that look like? And, I want to talk about our friends at TransFinder. They're always interested in finding out what's important to you, and they want to share a little bit about what they've got going on, too. Routing software, got it. Parent app, got it. Driver app, got it. GPS, got it. Inventory management solution, got it. Location intelligence, got it. Maps, you guessed it, we've got it. TransFinder is now an all-in-one provider for school transportation departments, period. That's because TransFinder is a leader in everything having to do with school transportation. With more than 3 decades of experience working with 3,000 school districts in North America, they've seen everything. They've built their solutions around what their clients need and want, and sometimes never knew they even wanted. We get you, and we've got this. Route Finder Plus, Stop Finder, Wayfinder, Service Finder, Viewfinder, you're all in one solution. Email marketing@transfinder.com or call 800-373-3609 to learn more. And don't forget to mention STN Podcast, The Nation. We'd love to be sure you get in there, talk to them, and you also can win a prize. Who doesn't want to win a free prize? I like free prizes. Ryan, you like free prizes?
Definitely. Give me some freebies.
Yeah, me too. I love the swags. Wonderful. Well, Ryan, you got a great conversation coming up with Mr. Charlie Hood of NASDP, so look forward to that.
Want to welcome to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage, Charlie Hood, the outgoing executive director of the National Association of State Directors of Pupil Transportation Services, good friend of STN. Charlie Hood, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to be here. And you didn't stumble over our awkward acronym like most people do.
I have a lot of experience saying it. It's much easier to say NASDP, certainly, but yes. So, Charlie, it's been several years now. I believe it's been about 6 or 7 years that you've been executive director. Time flies. Speaking of time flying, you're retiring here at the end of this month after your illustrious career in student transportation. One of the foremost experts. I know you don't like to toot your own horn. You get bashful about that kind of stuff, but you're very well respected across the industry. You are retiring just short of 40 years in the industry. You started back in 1981 in the state of Florida. What were you, how did you get into transportation?
Well, after I graduated from college, I actually worked on cars and trucks and buses, mostly cars, for a few years, just to sort of gain a real world skill that I could always fall back on. Turned out that teaching, which was my background in education in college, was not really my cup of tea. And so I pivoted, and it's kind of ironic that I actually ended up in education, albeit in a different field. So I've always felt a real connection to the entire world of the importance of educating kids and preparing them for success in the world.
So 1981, you started over in transportation. What did you do then? I mean, because we know a lot of folks know your name originally from your state directorship for Florida at the Florida Department of Education. You didn't start there, though, till 1989.
True.
So what did you do in transportation before that?
I was hired by Larry McIntyre as a program specialist dealing with school bus maintenance issues. And Larry, many of you may know, works for Navistar. He used to be the state director of student transportation in Florida. One of my all-time, was my all-time favorite boss and a real mentor to me. And he took a chance on me, hired me as a school bus maintenance specialist, dealing with training issues, dealing with helping school districts with vehicle diagnosis when they were having patterns of problems and that kind of thing. Monitoring visits, which were kind of our, I guess you want to call it our auditing function at the time, where we would go into school districts and inspect a percentage of their buses and tell them where their strengths and deficiencies were, along with other aspects of their student transportation operations. So it was a pretty good broad-based exposure to student transportation. I had a lot of help, a tremendous amount of help from a very gracious group of cohorts around the state, the local transportation directors and technicians and service managers and others. It was mostly fleet oriented at that time in my career. Graciously took me under their wing and helped me learn the school bus business in a way that many people who came up being a school bus person from the beginning probably already have as a natural bent. But for me, it was a learning process, and I had to sort of combine my white collar skills with my blue collar skills as a mechanic for 6 years before the Department of Education, and put it all together. And it's been a great ride. I've enjoyed it. I worked my way up in 1985. Larry appointed me as the director of the fleet management subsection. So basically, I just sort of an elevation within the same area where I was already working. putting together the state school bus bid. During that period of time, school districts in Florida were buying $80 to $100 million a year worth of school buses, and our office was the office that put together the bid under which they voluntarily pooled their purchases. So that was very rewarding. I got to do a lot of work with specifications. I gained a huge respect for the school bus suppliers and not just the OEM engineers and salespeople, but also the school bus component suppliers, because we involved them heavily in helping us assess the feasibility of the decisions we were making and recommending to the state board about what equipment school buses should have. Is it really safer? Is it feasible? Is it affordable? All those things. You can't do that without the input of the suppliers.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, the decisions were ours, of course. They were non-voting in that respect, but we always involved them fully parliamentarily in our meetings, at which we actually decided the specifications that were then carried to the State Board of Education for approval. And one of the things I'm proud of is that during that entire time, until I retired as state director in 2014, we never had even a single amendment to the specifications that we had recommended to the state board by the State Board of Education or others above our office.
And back then in the 80s, that was really when we saw diesel take hold of the industry. Well, here we go, fast forward almost 40 years later, and diesel still is leading the pack. But wow, did you foresee the changes with electric? I mean, you went through a phase where electric was introduced very early on, a very, first generation electric, and we went through hybrid, and we've gone through a couple of different iterations of propane. Did you envision this evolution from an energy standpoint, and how different is it than it was when you were just starting?
I think I foresaw the need for some alternative to diesel buses, beginning during the spike in fuel prices in the mid-aughts, or whatever we're calling the decade between 2000 and 2010. I think I saw that some alternative fuels were going to continue to gain in popularity. I can't honestly say that I believed that electricity would ultimately become predominant, although I do now believe that. I think that's borne out when you talk to any of the OEM school bus manufacturers. Their projections are that electricity will be the predominant mode of power for school buses, in a few years, as they become more practical, affordable, as government funding becomes more available, et cetera. But I didn't foresee that. No, I didn't foresee electricity specifically. I did foresee kind of an all of the above approach starting about 10 years ago. We actually did some significant standards development back in the late 80s, early 90s with CNG, which at that time seemed to be the predominant predicted alternative to diesel. And as it turns out, of course, for various reasons having to do with the cost of infrastructure and others, CNG never really did achieve the market dominance that was being predicted. But we established an elaborate set of standards and put them into school bus specifications in the event that it did become viable. So one could say that was a lot of wasted work, but it was a very interesting experience learning quite a bit about all the standards that apply to the cylinders, where the pressurized gas is stored, and the requirements for hydrostatically testing them every 5 years, just like a scuba tank, and all those things that are really part and parcel of that particular mode. But I'm really excited about electricity. I think that as battery technologies improve and more grants become available, I think it's an idea whose time has almost come.
And certainly, it changes a lot of things in the industry. And to your background, being a mechanic, and to something that you were in charge of really developing and managing for the state of Florida, maintenance training, that completely has been turned on its ear, right? I mean, with the whole internal combustion engine, it's still going to be here for a while, but we really see it moving to the side, and with all the emphasis going toward electric, that really opens up the type of technician or mechanic that school bus operators and school districts, school bus companies are looking to hire. But yet there's a big maintenance mechanic shortage out there that people are talking about. How could you see electric helping invigorate school bus to really get those candidates that they might need, but they've historically lost out to other professions?
Well, I think it's going to reward because it is a very expensive technology, and it's not without its own safety hazards. With regard to energy storage and the need to protect wiring and all the high current that those systems entail. So, I think it's going to reward technicians both in terms of their stature and eventually, hopefully, their pay. It's certainly going to reward the technicians who are adept with knowing principles of electricity and how to work with it and how to work with wiring and multiplexing systems and obviously electronics. For people that fashion themselves as geeks that kind of like working with computers and stuff like that, I think it's going to be a natural fit for some people like that. And so, in essence, it's certainly, as you pointed out, is going to change the kind of job that technicians do. But for many, many years, technicians have had to be proficient in electricity. I always used to say that a really good technician, mechanic, whatever you want to call him or her, is really sort of a jack of all trades. You have to know about electricity, you have to know about plumbing, you have to know about fluid dynamics, you have to know about thermodynamics. You really have to have a broad base of knowledge to be a successful technician.
Absolutely. And there's so much talk, of course, coming out of DC about funding. And one of your primary responsibilities as executive director for NASDPTS has been to be in touch with the various federal agency stakeholders and partners. What are you seeing right now? I mean, we know of there's a new bill that Senator Patty Murray out of Washington State seems to resurrect from some previous attempts to get $1 billion in funding for electric buses. There's a couple of companion bills in the House. We know that the infrastructure bill is being worked on in the background, and there could be that kind of green energy link up with that. What do you see, if you have your crystal ball, kind of evolving over the coming months in terms of funding and specifically for school bus? Because as we know, federal funding for school bus really limited mostly to some of the EPA DERA funds to, of course, get some of those dirty diesels out and replace them with alternative fuels. But we're looking at a lot of cash. So, kind of, what are you seeing? What are the tea leaves reading for you?
Well, I think unless the short-term breakthroughs in battery technology and so on occur that enable the incremental cost of electrified buses to become closer to conventional diesel buses, I think it's going to depend on some form of increased funding. And that, obviously, we're not seeing that at the local and state level, particularly with all the challenges the pandemic is presenting for budgets. But I do see some hope on the horizon in terms of increased federal support for student transportation via we've obviously all seen the VW environmental mitigation, and that's a relatively short-term patch, you might say. But in the longer term, as you know, then Senator, now Vice President Kamala Harris introduced one of the first school bus electrification bills, about 2 years ago, I think it was. And so, at least for the time being, I see the administrative support being there within the federal government, congressionally, and in the executive branch. So I think the future is bright, but we really have to be creative. Projects like Dominion Energy, where we've got vehicle-to-grid technologies at play, and the economics that go with being able to sell electricity back to the grid from the school bus sources. All of that is going to really demand that we continue to learn and be creative, and School Transportation News and other outlets have done a tremendous job through webinars and podcasts and everything you've been doing to help educate us and bring us and introduce us to those programs that are going on, like the new commitment that Montgomery County, Maryland has made to electrification and all those different projects. As more and more people become comfortable that they don't have to reinvent the wheel, that they can draw on that expertise, I think we're going to see an exponential growth in the number of new school buses coming in with electricity for power.
And speaking of drawing upon expertise, you obviously, we as we've been talking, you've been sharing some of your expertise and just scratching the surface, really. But this last week, you actually are lending some of that expertise to your successor there at NASDPTS, a familiar name and certainly someone who has a lot of experience working with school buses, Ronna Weber. You guys are going to be working together for the rest of the month, and I believe you will be retiring by the end of the month. But what are you and Ronna working on, if you could share, kind of as you transition?
Well, I'm trying to bring her up to speed on all the things that NASDPTS has been working on, but as you know, Ron is extremely experienced. Served as, I think, for about 5 years as executive director of NSTA until about 3-4 years ago. And subsequently, I think has been doing some work for the American Bus Association. She was an incredibly fortuitous choice for NASDPTS to succeed me because she can pretty much hit the ground running and has. We're already monitoring the same inbox in terms of emails, you might say. And so she's seeing all the issues. We're sharing responses. I'm trying not to constrain her too much with this is the way it's always been done because she will have her own style. It won't be exactly the same as mine, and that's a good thing. I'm looking forward to the new ideas and the new approaches that she'll bring. I'm confident she'll introduce some new services to NASDPTS that I either didn't conceive of or never got around to. So it's all good in my book.
And speaking of something that maybe not you conceived, but you definitely worked very hard on, I want to touch on this real quickly, seatbelts in school buses. Obviously, that has changed. We were talking about electric earlier and how that has changed. Certainly, school bus seatbelt acceptance. There was a paper that was released just last month from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration looking at seatbelts and the effect on behavior. We've written about that for several years now. When you're looking back over your career, I know you're very proud of that seatbelt position that NASDPTS took. Is that the kind of the pinnacle for you? What other things stand out for you maybe that you accomplished or you helped influence?
Well, I can't take credit for that, but I certainly have been involved with it, going back to my presidency with NASDPTS during 2008 through 2010 or prior. But that is one of the things that I think we are proud of is the fact that we went ahead and stepped up as an association and exercised a leadership position on that and took what probably still in some sectors is an unpopular position because we do know that they cost more. I mean, they will increase the cost of a new school bus as of right now by 6 to 10%, let's say. And so, but we think it's the right thing to do. I mean, there's no question that there's plenty of evidence that lap shoulder belts in all kinds of vehicles, including school buses, improve safety. While school buses are already incredibly safe, and it's a very small incremental improvement, 1 to 2 lives a year, according to the 2008 NHTSA rulemaking work that they did. In severe crashes and rollovers, they're a better system. They're a better mousetrap. And we've seen some states, Iowa and Nevada, just in Texas, and just in recent years that have adopted lap shoulder belts. I've been pushing my own state informally to get away from the lap belts that are required in Florida. And obviously, New York and New Jersey are in the same boat, and NTSB is pushing them as well. We need to move to lap shoulder belts, and states that aren't already considering them at least need to implement some pilot projects or local school districts and contractors, because the NHTSA report you mentioned is very clear that it corroborates the things that you guys have been reporting for many years, which is that school buses that have lap shoulder belts, drivers nearly universally observe improved behavior when they make it a priority to see that the kids buckle up. And so I think it makes buses safer because there's less distraction on the bus when kids are in their seats. But apart from that, I think the biggest accomplishment that I would say with NASDPTS is that it has remained viable and it's had a particular focus on helping state directors. We have other groups, suppliers and state and national association council members, leaders, and others that we serve. But our primary focus is on serving state directors, making their jobs easier, helping them broker information amongst each other. And I think we've done a good job of that over the years.
Definitely you have. So what's next for you? I know you're an avid fisherman. I always like to see on Facebook your catch of the day and what you're preparing. You and your lovely wife, Mary, are wonderful in the kitchen and always have such great food. What are you going to be focusing on here as you officially retire? Now that you retired from Florida, now you've retired from NASDPTS. Are you retiring completely from the industry? Are you going to stay somewhat aligned? What's next?
I told the board when I let them know that I was interested in retiring that I would remain on to help them in any way I can in an informal, non-paid volunteer capacity. I'll be around with NCST and other projects. I'll certainly be happy to. I want to stay involved. As you know, it's an overused kind of a cliche almost in our business that we bleed yellow. But I bleed NASDPTS too, so I want to continue to help the association in particular and the people that it serves moving forward. On a more personal level, obviously you mentioned angling. I want to get back into scuba diving some more as soon as the water warms up. I'm not a cold water fan. But we've been doing a lot of hiking in the last year because it's one of the few things you can do that's, anything outside obviously is something that you can still do during a pandemic. So we've been doing quite a bit of that. I intend to get more involved with that, including volunteering for the Florida Trail Association on trail maintenance and those kinds of things. So just got the usual list of things people want to do when they retire, with the exception of golf, because I've never picked up a golf club.
Yeah, well, and I saw the letter from Patrick McManaman, the current NASDPTS president from Vermont, and he had mentioned that I think you probably have a little bit of a honey-do list as well to catch up on. So,
there is that. Yeah.
Well, we don't want to keep you waiting. I know that honey-do list is growing by the moment here, but hopefully, look forward to continue working with you, Charlie. For those who don't know, Charlie is a member of our National Board of Advisors for the Transporting Students with Disabilities and Special Needs Conference that we normally hold around this time of year in Frisco, Texas. It'll be in November 17th to the 22nd, coming up later this year. But Charlie, it's always a pleasure. Love working with you. Hopefully we can continue to do that, talk some college football, and maybe grab an adult beverage sometime soon.
Sounds great, Ryan. Thank you for the opportunity. I've, as you know, I've been an avid reader and follower of school transportation news literally since the beginning. So I appreciate everything you guys do for the industry, and especially everything you do that ultimately contributes to the same mission we all have, which is to help kids stay safe and be successful.
You've done more than your part. Thanks so much, Charlie.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hey, always great to hear from Charlie Hood. Thanks a lot, Ryan, for jumping on the podcast with me today. We appreciate you, School Transportation Nation. Hey, don't forget, we've got a great editorial series on the website called Pearls of Wisdom, and you can hear from Charlie and other student transportation professionals by visiting stnonline.com/tag, that's TAG/wisdom, WISDOM. You can find some great content there on the STN website. We got everything you need, coronavirus information, funding updates, the latest and greatest from around the industry. So be sure and visit stnonline.com for all your news and information when you need it. We got it. We appreciate our sponsors, TransFinder and Zonar, for their support of this episode. Thank you for listening. Subscribe, stream, review our podcast. We love the 5-star reviews. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We love you, nation. We'll see you next week.